To the cloud.
All right, got it.
Well, let's hear about this project. Do you want to go? Do you want us to like introduce ourselves or anything?
Yeah, that would be great.
All right. So what would you? I don't know. I was always just. Why don't I start with one and you call on somebody else to introduce themselves? Okay. So, Connie, you want to kick us off by introducing yourself real quick?
Okay, I'm Connie Schmaltz. I'm on the anti-racism committee at St. John's, and my brother was a pastoral vicar in New Orleans 1,000 years ago. So I'm always interested to hear about inner city ministry there. So
Wow.
we're eager to hear what else you're doing.
Do you know what church he was at?
It was Peter Myers Church. I want to say St. Paul, but I'm not sure.
That could be.
It was Missouri.
Yeah.
But I think very active Missouri.
Yeah, there's a St. Paul and a St. Paul's that are within a mile of each other, not to be confused.
Okay. Oh gosh, no wonder. Pedo something, but he'd be retired if he hasn't gone to sainthood.
Yeah. Neat.
So we're eager to hear about what you're doing.
Thank you.
Right. Pat, do you want to introduce yourself next? You're still muted.
Oh, good. I was having technical issues. Hi, I'm Pat Bennett. I'm with the ARC committee also, and visited New Orleans some years ago, and I'm interested in what's happening.
Thank you.
And also on the church council, one of our church council members.
I am on church council.
Thank you. All right, Lois, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Lois Kopf, and I'm also on the anti-racism committee. And so I'm interested in housing in general. I think it's a very cool project that you're doing that, well, at least the little that I've heard. So I really want to learn more about it too and see if we can be supportive in any way.
Thank you.
Bev and Mike.
Guys are on mute.
I think you're on mute.
Are we all?
We're good.
Okay. I'm Bev Kazmarski. I'm chair of the worship committee, but I also work part-time for a nonprofit, and many of our clients could use affordable housing. So that's a subject very near and dear. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say.
And I'm Mike. I'm the vice president on council, and mostly because of Bev. Learning all about what goes on with housing for a lot of people in the area that are quite interested. And I'll give you my little sidebar. So I'll give you our loose connection to New Orleans. So Drew Brees, Saints quarterback.
Yes.
Our son was at Purdue.
And he lived in the same dorm.
When Drew Brees was quarterback.
Wow.
And
there you go.
And he said he's as nice a guy as he appeared to be.
Yeah,
there you go. That's the connection.
That's true.
Carmen, you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Carmen Johnson. I'm on the church council. I'm also a member of the Social Justice Social Ministry Committee. I love New Orleans. I've been there a few times. I also have spent most of my career working on college campuses. So the idea of a partnership with Tulane is also really intriguing to me. And I'm really excited to learn more about your project.
Thanks.
And Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Tomlinson. I'm on the Social Justice and Social Ministry Committee along with Carmen. My mom is actually part of an affordable housing in New Jersey and has been through a lot of challenges with that, and just really interested to hear more about what you guys are doing too.
Thank you.
All right, I think that's everybody. And I just texted with Steve Nyman, who's the chair of the Interest Committee. He said he'll be on in 2 minutes, but
great.
We'll go ahead and get started.
Sure. Well, I feel like I at least should introduce myself briefly. I've been on a Zoom with some of you before. I think was it last year that we did that around Mardi Gras, or 2 years ago?
This past year, so it'll be a year on this year's Shrove Tuesday.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So I'm Ben. I'm the pastor at Bethlehem. I've been in New Orleans 3.5 years now. I came there for Bethlehem. I'm also doing my PhD in history at Tulane University, where I study the relationship between white supremacy and Christianity in the United States, and specifically the ways in which baptism was used to create and reinforce race in early America, particularly in New Orleans, as would not be surprising. Before I was at Bethlehem, I was a college chaplain for a couple of years at Berea College in Berea, Kentucky, a little bit south of Lexington. My first call was on the north side of Milwaukee at a very large church called Holy Cross. And a couple minutes ago, Blake and I were in seminary together at Yale, and we were chapel ministers together for the Lutheran Studies program in, I think, 2011. Is that right?
2010, 2011, I think. Yeah, because it was your middle year and my senior year. Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, and I think Pastor Blake would probably say this as well, we're opposites, but we're the kind of opposites that somehow become really good friends. And so it's really a delight to be on Zoom with you, to see all of you. I said this last year, and partly the connection got started because of my connection with Pastor Blake, but you were the first church that sent us money after I got to Bethlehem. And when I got to Bethlehem, it was a mess. Some might say a hot mess. Bethlehem people would say that too. You know, it'd been 3.5 years of interim. The previous pastor left, lots of conflict and all sorts of that. And it really felt special to find another church that believed in us enough to want to support us. We've prayed for you in worship every Sunday for the last 3 years, and that's really meaningful to us. So I guess, I want to start with a note of thanks, because I don't think we would have ever been in a position to start some of the exciting things that we've started, now in years 2 and 3 and going on 4 without your support and love and care in the very beginning of this project. So thank you for that. On to housing. I'll give just a brief outline about Bethlehem and how this project gets started. And then I have sort of a little slideshow that I can show you with some more facts and figures and renderings of what we're doing. We are, Tulane University is the biggest and most well-known university in New Orleans. There are many others, but they have a well-regarded School of Architecture, and the School of Architecture has a program called Urban Build, where students that take this studio design a house in the fall and then build it in the spring. Last year was Urban Build 16, so they've built 16 of these houses, almost all of them in the Central City neighborhood, which is where Bethlehem is located. They've had, before us, they had different partners for the last 16 years. Last year's house got built next to Bethlehem, to our property. And so we got to know Byron, who's the architect and professor who runs the program, and the students, because we let them use our parking lot all last spring, gave them, bathroom access and electricity and stuff like that from the church to make their work easier. And the first time I met Byron, I brought him into Bethlehem and showed him our rotting wood columns and stuff, and said, maybe someday we could have some sort of partnership. And also mentioned that we own this vacant lot across the street. The church bought it in the early 90s. At one point, there was an apartment building on it that burned down, and it had been just 10,000 square feet of concrete since then. As we got to know each other better, I had a couple more meetings with him where I said, be really interested in talking about building housing on this lot. What do you think we could fit? What might be possible? And he got really excited about the idea, but kind of said, well, I'm excited, but, there's the School of Architecture legal people and 2 deans and the financial people. So maybe something could happen, but there'd be a lot of hurdles. Then in early July, I got a call from him and he said, the School of Architecture would like to move forward with Bethlehem as our new partner. And we'd like to do it starting this fall, which, in the middle of July is like a month and a half away from when classes start. I had been thinking that this was like planting seeds for like 5 years in the future, right? Like when our finances were better and we had lots of big donors already and things like that. But it felt like this was our opportunity to say yes. And so we organized probably the quickest congregational meeting in Bethlehem's history for, 2 weeks later exactly, and voted to move ahead with the project. So the basic outlines of the project are that on this 10,000 square foot lot, which is very big for our neighborhood in New Orleans, though in other parts of the country it is not big, is to put 4 affordable houses that the students will design in the fall and build in the spring, basically 1 each year for the next 4 years, because they work on an academic calendar. They're out there right now. Let me see, I might have a picture I can pull up from,
You mean like literally right now you're going to spin around and look out the window?
Well, I'm at my house. They are probably just wrapping up, but they basically work 8 a.m. to sundown every day, Monday through Saturday for 16 straight weeks. And then the house has to be built because that's the end of their semester. So this was the house yesterday. They're working on putting in the rebar and trenches to pour the foundation. I think there's 12 students who are working on it this spring. That's a little bit bigger than it has been because a lot of the students are really excited about this opportunity.
Can you put that up again? I wanted to see like the footprint of the house. You had the frame there. I'm just trying to imagine what.
Yeah, I might have a better, if you'll, I can find maybe it's not in that Facebook post. Let's see, if I go to Bethlehem, I have a good picture that will show sort of the bigger footprint if my internet cooperates. It's not that one. Let's back up. There we go. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the front of the lot where we're building first. The houses will be about 1,100 square feet. And when I pull up the slideshow, I can show you the plans and renderings and such. But basically, there'll be this. This will be an access drive that goes back through much of the property.
And in that big wooden frame, is that the footprint for one unit then?
Yes, we'll be building 4 townhouses.
Okay.
And that's one. I'll show you in a little bit how they get laid out.
Okay.
Yeah, these are the frames for the forms to pour the foundation.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. So, what was I gonna say? Tulane is donating the design and the labor for the houses, which, as you can imagine, allows us to build them well under market rate, probably $130,000 to $140,000 less expensive than if we were using a market rate builder to make these. So, I mean, it's an incredible opportunity and partnership for us. Let me pull up my presentation, and I have some more details I can share from that, and it'll probably help remind me what we're talking about. All right. That's the Easter before the pandemic. Bethlehem, if you don't know. Let's see. This week really is our 134th anniversary. The church was started in 1888. It's the oldest historically Black Lutheran congregation in the continental U.S. And that's me. Don't need to know more about me. Our other big program is called Community Table, and we started this right before the pandemic, like 2 weeks before. And the idea was that we would have a small free meal after church on Sundays for our neighborhood with like live music, and bring in some partners and services to make people's lives better and just treat people really well. And we got to do that twice. And then it was March 15th when coronavirus hit. Like New York City, New Orleans was one of the first places where it got really bad. And it was a scary time. We ended up canceling worship for 364 straight days. And we moved Community Table to an outside to-go meal instead of like the inside at a table thing that we had really wanted. But it very quickly grew such that a month into the pandemic, we were serving 500 meals a week on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I think, with different partners that were helping us out, and really volunteers that came much more from the neighborhood than from the congregation, because a lot of people at Bethlehem were high risk or taking care of people who were high risk. So Community Table has continued to grow. I think, the statistic now is that we've served like 45,000 free meals from the beginning of the pandemic. Which is way more than we expected, but the need has been really great. And we've partnered with different things. We've been a COVID testing site. We've done vaccine events. After Hurricane Ida, we partnered with World Central Kitchen, which is a big international nonprofit, but they helped prepare the food for us to serve 500 free meals a day for 18 straight days after Hurricane Ida, most of which without any power in the church. That was a real adventure and really unpleasant for much of it because it was hot. But that I have that in here because that's really one of the things that got us into affordable housing. So, as we give out these meals, like I spend hours every week just standing out on our corner and handing out meals to people. And literally every time I hear stories about people's terrible housing situations. Housing in New Orleans is, y'all live in an expensive place to live. Housing is expensive in New Orleans, but the corollary problem is that wages are extraordinarily low in New Orleans. I think 60% of the city's economy is in hospitality or service industry sectors. And most of those, as are not well-paying jobs and very rarely have benefits. And so it's becoming, it already was an expensive place to live. Coronavirus intensified that, and Hurricane Ida really intensified that because it put a lot of rental units out of commission. And so even people who are making a lot of money in New Orleans, six-figure incomes and up, it's really hard to find any rental housing right now because there's so little capacity for it. As you can imagine, that pushes the prices up for everyone. And it's, really an ongoing crisis. From the beginning, we always look for as many community partners as we can. The Tulane School of Architecture. After Ida, Loyola University Law School, we got connected with them, and we had lawyers who came and helped people with FEMA disaster applications and followed up with them. That's a horrible process. Some of you might have been through that in your own storms. But navigating that, if you don't have regular internet access or something is literally a nightmare. Some local foundations, other things like that. Yeah, here's a couple things about housing. The median income for our zip code is $18,000 a year. The waiting list for affordable housing vouchers in New Orleans is over 20,000 people long. They're not even taking new names onto that list. At minimum wage, which in New Orleans is still at $7.25, the state of Louisiana has never changed that. You'd have to work 113 hours a week to afford a 2-bedroom rental at fair market rent, which is a government term that is actually less than market rate rent. And affordable housing opportunities are actually disappearing. So, it couldn't be a worse crisis in a lot of ways. Let's see. This is a little rendering of the first house that we're building. That's from last fall, so it was a preliminary rendering, but it's a good idea of what I think it will ultimately look like, although those colors aren't relevant. Urban Build is the architecture school program we're working with. This will be Urban Build 17. And they're well known. They've won awards. They do good work, and we're really excited about that partnership. So this is a lot before, like the pictures you saw from earlier today. It was literally 10,000 square feet of concrete. That was it. The apartment building in the back burned down a while ago, and we used it for overflow parking for Mardi Gras once a year. Here are the plans for the house. All our permits have gone through with the city. We were actually really instrumental in helping pass an amendment through the New Orleans City Council in December now. After Katrina, the city council downgraded a lot of the zoning to only allow single and 2-family units on most of New Orleans, and that was not historically how New Orleans had been zoned. And so that's one of the things that has led to this huge housing crunch, is that for I think 80% of the city, and it's not a big city, but it's still a city, you could only build single or 2-family houses. So the amendment that got passed allows 3 and 4 unit developments as long as they include affordable housing units in them. So the goal is to increase density, which will help to create more units, but you can't do that and just make designer units or Airbnbs or things like that. The increased density has to come from affordable housing.
Master Ben, on that slide before, I'm just trying to get an idea of the scale. So is that like about 40 feet long and 20 feet wide, or?
I can zoom in, and then we can have a
great.
That's not just me guessing. Oh, I'm not sure why that. Hold on, I'll get you that answer, but let me finish this because that's not looking like how.
Okay, yeah, I thought it might be real easy to get. Never mind if I didn't.
Yeah, I'll pull it up in just a second.
Yeah, no worries.
So these are a couple more renderings of the house that's being built. So this is not what the other houses will look like. This was, each team will design them in the fall, but this is a good idea of the placement we're looking at, which is basically, where's that pen thing? Draw, let's try that. Okay, so that's the first house, second house, third house, fourth house. So that's kind of how they'll be laid out in that lot, with the sort of access drive there to get into them and into the back. I don't expect that's how the back 3 houses will look, but that's sort of the layout as we're looking at that. Oh, I didn't know that one go away. Okay. Yeah, there's another rendering of that and of the front of the house. I'm not sure. Oh, maybe if I hit clear. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so this year, basically what we're looking at is raising $225,000. The house we expect to cost itself around $180,000. That's with the currently high lumber prices. I don't know if any of you are dealing with those in your lives. Hopefully you're not, but they're bad. And then the other money, a lot of it was just first year expenses in terms of getting the lot prepared. So, it was $15,000 just to clear the concrete, get that demolished and all of that. But in subsequent years, probably a pretty good guess is that as long as lumber stays high but not catastrophically increases, we'll be raising around $180,000 for houses 2, 3, and 4. A couple other things about it, I guess, from the beginning. We're designed to be ADA accessible. Our council president uses a chair to get around, so that's been a priority for us from the beginning. And then we're partnering with Crescent Care, which is one of the most well-regarded community health organizations in New Orleans. They started as the No AIDS Task Force in the 1980s, but have since expanded from that. So they're a very comprehensive clinic now that provides free care. But they still have a real focus on work with people living with HIV. And so we'll be partnering with their supportive housing program for people living with HIV. And that's who will go into these apartments. It will function similarly to Section 8, where people will pay a percentage of their income and then the rest is subsidized, and the church will receive basically the fair market rent, which is a number set by the government. I think it's a slightly different pool of money than like straight Section 8 because there's different funding for people living with HIV. But that's basically, if you're imagining how the program will work, that's what it will look like. I guess I'll just say a couple more things about the funding side of things, and then just, whatever questions or things you're curious about learning more about, I'm happy to talk about. Bethlehem has maybe one family that could put up a 4-figure gift for a project like this. And so we have a fundraising committee. I have a volunteer on it who's a professional fundraiser and consultant, and every meeting we have, he's like, Pastor Ben, this is not the right way to do this. And I'm like, I know, but it's the only way to do it for us. So, in a normal church, we would have spent a couple years doing interviews and brought in a consultant and, seeded some big gifts and things like that. And we basically just said, yes, we're going to figure it out as we go. So basically what we're working towards is, our goal is to get about $100,000 from other congregations. Right now, I think we have about $65,000 committed from other churches. We're running a GoFundMe campaign to help crowdfund. Our goal for that is $50,000. In 3 weeks, we've raised $26,000 for that. And my hope is to wrap that up by Mardi Gras. So we're actually ahead of schedule on that. And that's been really encouraging. I think we've had 336 donors or something like that so far. And, most of it is small. So it's been really cool to see that happen. And the rest of the funding, is working through grants and foundations and finding some hopefully larger individual donors to help us make it through. That's sort of the and medium picture overview. I can pull up in just a second the dimensions of that house that someone asked about.
So how many times have you given this talk? Like how many like, seems like you've been at this, you must be tired of giving this talk by now.
No, I mean, there aren't a lot of congregations. It's interesting. There aren't a lot of congregations that have wanted to like actually talk about it. Like most have either been like no or, you know, yes, here's what we're gonna do. So I've probably met with 5 congregations out of the 50 that I've contacted, something like that. I don't know if those numbers are exact, but that's probably an accurate ratio for what that's looked like.
We have a hard time making decisions, right? We need lots of information.
I think it's nice. I mean, you know, in a lot of ways, like, you know, fundraising is relationship building if you're doing it right. And that's what we started Community Table with a GoFundMe. And, you know, that was a smaller scale. Our goal was to raise $10,000, and eventually we did. And just that brought in, I think, 100 new donors to Bethlehem in, you know, the course of 3 months. And now some of those donors are volunteers at Bethlehem. One was just elected to the city council and is like a great friend and champion of Bethlehem. You know, others are people that, you know, gave us $250 then. And then I wrote to them about this project and asked if they would consider a more substantial gift and sent us a $5,000 check, you know? So you never know what's going to come out of the small things. And we also don't have an option other than that. So yeah, that's sort of been how we've used it. I'm gonna.
So Ben, what might be helpful with Steve asking the question is, like, maybe would help. What's the dimension of the lot? I know 100 by 100 is 10,000 square feet, but obviously it's not. 100.
Yeah, it's more like 50 across and whatever. Blake will tell you I'm not a math person.
200, but 50 by 200 then, yeah. Yeah,
something like that.
Okay.
You see, we went to divinity school, so we just pass the vision and pray about it, right? You know, a liturgy.
I have a question here. Yeah. Here in many of the towns in this area, the affordable housing, there were certain percentage requirements, or you could opt, say for instance, Summit, building an entire building and every apartment, whatever in it was affordable housing. And that way you met the commitment that you were to make. Yeah. But now recently what they've done is there's an opt-out. So when you're building somewhere, you can actually pay to say Summit. I'm not saying it happened in Summit, but where we used to live, it happened. You can pay a certain amount so that you don't have to have any affordable housing in what you're building. So is that an issue there, or
I don't think there's that specific clause. There was not that specific clause in the amendment that we passed.
Okay.
I think a bigger issue is that most of the housing that is affordable is in terrible shape and has terrible landlords. So like Josh Bruno is this guy who owns the most apartment buildings in our neighborhood. And he's like a caricature of a slumlord. Like he drives a Mercedes, he wears a big gold chain. He was in court today for not paying his mortgages. He took an insurance check from a building that collapsed in Hurricane Zeta, which was, 2.5 years ago. The roof collapsed in this building. It's 2 blocks from Bethlehem. I pass it twice every day. And he's renting out the side that didn't collapse. And then the roof is still collapsed on the other side. So, water comes in and Like there's a haphazard blue tarp on it, but like that's the kind of conditions that you're going to get if you're in the Section 8 program. And so, this would be just like an infinite step up for the quality of the affordable housing stock in New Orleans.
I see, like where we live right now, it's a relatively new condo complex. There's what 22
22
units.
There
and
had to be two.
There's four of them.
Or four.
There's
That's right.
four affordable housing units in this complex. Now, affordable here might be different than obviously is down there. But I guess the thing is, I mean, just seeing your presentation and seeing the statistics and the numbers, it's just like it blows my mind. And that example we gave of the slum landlord, I mean, that's not unheard of around here. That's, I mean, New York City and the Bronx and Brooklyn. I mean, all these places have those sorts of things, but it's just like at a different level down there when you read about all the flooding and everything that happens in New Orleans. So
I'm also just wondering, I mean, so New Jersey is another state with a huge, huge housing crisis, but we have a historically liberal government, which I'm guessing Louisiana, I think probably has a historically slightly more conservative one. So like we have the Mount Laurel decision, which is what you're all are talking about, which forced towns like Summit to have affordable housing, but then for a long time, because they used to satisfy it by just paying off places like Newark to take more affordable units for us. Now we have to have it in the community. But you're right. You either have to build units or set aside, or you can pay into the affordable fund trust fund, because that's what. In Summit, that's what we fought as the Clergy Council for years to get this more, because it had millions and millions and millions of dollars in it. Because every developer would rather pay millions to not put an affordable unit and keep them all at fair market value, because then they know they can charge, $3,000-4,000 a month in rent in Summit. For a 1-2 bedroom apartment. But I'm guessing we're both in a crisis, but a slightly different political arrangement here that has created each of these.
Right.
Yeah, our government in New Orleans would claim to be liberal, but is historically ineffective, is what I would say. And the state government does us no favors. Any time they can stick it to New Orleans, they generally do. It's a complicated dynamic, but not one that helps anybody. Let's just say that.
How will you ever decide who's going to get those houses?
That's what I want to know.
4 units. I mean, that just sounds heartbreaking to go through that process.
Yeah, that's ultimately a major reason why we're partnering with Crescent Care for them, is both to like offload the responsibility of that decision. Because like I stand out on the corner like handing out free meals to people all the time, and everyone asks about the affordable housing, and like there would be no good way for me to make that decision and not feel like I'm screwing over someone I care about.
Yeah.
So by having a trusted partner with like a narrow scope, right? So it's people who are eligible for permanent supportive housing who are living with HIV. We say like, okay, from this program, they're going to make the decision and place someone who comes up at the right place at the right time into these houses. It also gives us, more expertise in dealing with the financial and housing side of things, and ensures that the people who are there are already engaged in wraparound care and services. So I think, it's not that, like, sometimes when I say that, I feel like I'm passing the buck, but I really feel like for my relationship with the neighborhood, that's for the best, to say like, this isn't my decision who goes in here. We'll keep taking care of everyone like we do. And, sorry, like, it's not everyone can live there. It would be great if this was the standard of housing that took off.
Wouldn't it be great to have some copycats, go on and, do some other things like that?
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully I think we'll be able to show that this is possible. There aren't, all the other churches that I know of that are doing affordable housing, and there may be exceptions, but I'm not aware of them, have really valuable property in downtown areas, like where big developers are interested. So I know churches in Seattle, in DC, in New York City that are doing this, where a developer will purchase it for $17 million and then lease back the first floor to the church in perpetuity, or 99 years, or whatever. But we're not at the scale or the value that developers are interested in. So, we're making a go of it ourselves and ensuring that Bethlehem, creates and retains ownership of these houses, so that it's something that will also bring, sustainability to Bethlehem as a congregation, as well as to the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So in your congregation, I mean, if the picture from Easter pre-pandemic was representative of the size of the congregation, I got to imagine that a lot of the people in your congregation are actively involved in this project.
Yeah. Probably like you, the pandemic has been a roller coaster in terms of people's just involvement with church, and what church attendance looks like, and whether it's really a useful metric or not. I think less and less that it is, because, now I would say a quarter of the people who would be there on a given Sunday are watching from home because they're quarantined, their kids are quarantined, they have little kids and they can't get vaccinated, they're taking care of elderly people. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why it's hard to show up on a Sunday morning in person when you could watch, our stream from your house. So it's interesting to see in that there are a lot of people involved, and like Community Table, it also draws in a lot of people who aren't like technically Bethlehem members, okay, but still care about what we're doing and want to be a part of it. I would say not all, but so we've had 26 new members join in the last 3 years, and probably half of them got involved through Community Table, like as volunteers, as people who are not looking for a church necessarily. Yeah. And so I expect that the housing project, will mirror that in some ways, that there are people who really care about that who aren't a part of the church. Certainly, like money-wise, that's been the case. The vast majority of funding for this is coming from outside of Bethlehem, because what a big gift looks like for a lot of our families isn't something that moves the needle, even on this, right? Which, like, for our church is a big project, but in like real money terms, like $225,000 to build a house is small money in lots of places. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
So is a lot of that, I mean, with your comment about people outside the congregation or being interested in working actively in this, how do you manage to get that involvement? I mean, is that just word of mouth that makes that happen, or is it you out there all the time and pressing the flesh and that sort of thing, or what?
I think it's probably a mix of those things. I think a lot of it is because Bethlehem has developed credibility in our neighborhood and in our city for like helping people first and worrying about our bottom line second. Maybe that's a little bit of a crass way to put it, but it works because right now when I like ask someone to come and help or invite someone to Bethlehem, usually I'm saying, could you make time to volunteer for 2 hours and help feed our neighborhood? And that's a different ask than saying, would you come to church and listen to me talk at you, about Jesus or whatever. Like there are some people who will respond to that invitation, but I feel like there are a lot more people that will respond to the, will you come and help make a meal? And then, 3 months later, I see them like staying for the service or starting to ask me questions about what it means to be Lutheran, things like that. So, like there are like mutual aid Facebook groups in New Orleans, and I'll post in those when we're looking for volunteers, and like they don't let most other churches post in there because people don't want to be proselytized on Facebook stuff, but like they're all really friendly to us and to Bethlehem. And like when I have a crisis and no volunteers are showing up, I can post on one of these like citywide groups, and a few people always show up who are willing to help because they've seen us doing that for the last couple of years during the pandemic.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that even kind of goes back for a very long time, right? Like, wasn't part of Bethlehem's exodus, even from the LCMS, had to do with like the outreach to the AIDS community back in the 80s, right? I mean, like some of this has been part of this creation's.
Yeah.
Sure. That like.
I mean, I think most of like the younger people helping with us don't know that, but it is true. Bethlehem started the first hotline in the state for gay men to get counseling and information during the early days of the HIV crisis in the 80s, and like staffed it themselves through volunteers. You can imagine like this work did not go over well with the Missouri Synod, as well as some other stuff they did that ran afoul of those politics. But internally, Bethlehem has been concerned and caring about the neighborhood for a long time. And like people in older generations know Bethlehem for that, or for the school. Yeah.
Connie, you're muted.
Is that a former school, or is there a school, a preschool, or some kind of a school now?
Yeah, sadly, it's a former school. So I'll try not to go on too long, but Bethlehem was, I think, probably the fourth Black Lutheran church founded in New Orleans. New Orleans was the first city in the country where sort of Black Lutheranism took off and started to thrive. And it's because these churches were started in 1879, 1881, and Bethlehem in 1888. And what had happened was after the Civil War, when the Reconstruction government took over Louisiana, they integrated the public schools in New Orleans. In 1876, when the white supremacists took back over state control, the first thing they did was resegregate the New Orleans public schools and then defund all of the Black schools. And they decided that no Black person needed an education after 5th grade and cut all the higher grades from the public schools in New Orleans. So the Lutherans, and they came technically out of the Synodical Conference, which was dominated by the Missouri Synod, but not exclusively the Missouri Synod. But so these, super well-educated dudes from Germany and the Midwest came down and started churches with schools, because education was exactly what everybody wanted and needed, who was a part of the neighborhood. The public schools couldn't and wouldn't provide it. And so, these churches flourished. I think by 1902, there were over 600 students in Black Lutheran schools in New Orleans. And for about 13 or 14 years, there was a seminary for Black Lutherans in the city called Luther Seminary. That eventually moved to North Carolina, I think in 1917 or 18. But, for a while, there was just like a thriving ecosystem of schools and churches here. Bethlehem School closed in 1961, right around when legal sort of desegregation was happening, and when Bethlehem's previous building and original building and school were condemned by the fire marshal, and they had to build a new one with limited funding from the Missouri Synod, limited enough that they didn't have an additional school building like they used to. That's another whole complicated story. But so yes, it was a former school, but we do have members, and there are, you know, if you grew up in Central City during a certain time, either you went to the school or you knew about the school and had people who did. So there are a lot of people around town who still know Bethlehem from that, even though, you know, it closed 60 years ago.
Pastor Ben, is your membership still mostly right around the church, or have they moved away and they come back to go to church, or combination, or what?
Housing is a big part of the answer to that. Most of the people who've been members at Bethlehem a long time grew up near the church, especially after Katrina, when people were displaced and exiled across the country. I mean, we had people who spent years in Texas, years in Georgia, years in Utah. And when they came back, they couldn't afford to move, you know, even a couple years post-Katrina back into the neighborhood. And so we have people living in, I mean, unless you know New Orleans, this wouldn't mean a lot necessarily, but like on the West Bank, which is across the Mississippi River, and in New Orleans East, which is way out to the east of the city, who, you know, they grew up here, but they can't afford to live close to the church anymore. And so, you know, drive in. A lot of newer members do live closer to the church. And there are still, you know, plenty who do, whose families had houses. But a lot of what happened in New Orleans after Katrina was that, you know, a family had owned a house for literally generations, but no one ever took care of like the title paperwork or anything, because it was a family house. And in Katrina then, you know, both families lost all their records if their houses were washed out, but also a lot of the city, you know, records were not cared for and whatever. And then, you know, opportunists came in and would try and force these properties to tax sales and, you know, mechanisms like that to get them declared blighted if the residents didn't have the means to get insurance. And then the insurance companies would say, no title, no insurance. Even if your family's been living there for 5 generations, if you couldn't produce a title, State Farm didn't pay. So yeah. I know that's kind of a long answer, but, you know, it does all go back to housing and access to housing.
So I have a question, Ben, about, we do some things with Appalachian Service Project and with Habitat for Humanity and things like that. And the question when you talked about labor, so some parts of a house are really hard, right? You know, so is that labor, like?
So the students do everything except for stuff that has to be licensed by trade people. So we hire out, you know, the HVAC, the plumbing, stuff like that. But like all the carpentry and things like that, the students do it.
Okay.
And, you know, they're guided by staff and faculty. You know, they're not out there with like a book trying to figure out how to put stuff up.
They're better off than our ASB projects. Thank God.
Yeah. But I've been in their houses before, so, you know, we know what to expect in terms of quality and completeness.
Okay.
Hi, Lois.
So Ben, like you mentioned the licensed trade. So do you get fair cooperation in the city from local plumbing companies and HVAC and electrical companies?
The professor, who's the architect, Byron, has his own design build firm. And so, you know, he works as a contractor outside of his work with the Tulane School of Architecture. So he has his own stable of subs that he hires from, which, I mean, for me, that's one of the huge blessings personally, is that neither I nor our council president have to be the project manager for this. You know, like, he's both the architect and the contractor that handles all of that. And that, I mean, I'm good at some things, but I could not do that on a project. So we're very glad to have a good partner for that.
Pastor Ben, this is kind of a crass question. I mean, when I think about our church and its resources, it feels we should do something with housing, because most of us have housing, although I think there are a few that don't. But in general, we're pretty richly blessed that way. Would make a case for us, you know, what is the, I mean, there are also a great need for housing in Newark, and in many ways, you're coming to us, so there's something to be asked now that you're asking us. So it's a place where there's something started and we could add to it, but make a case for why especially it might be nice for us to contribute to your project.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think for me, there's a couple reasons. One is that from like a Lutheran church perspective, I feel like if Bethlehem can pull this off, then it's an example for the rest of the church about what could and should be possible. We had a film crew with us for the groundbreaking ceremony a couple of weeks ago, and actually in about 3 weeks, a film about Bethlehem and its history and this project is coming out through the ELCA's Office of African Descent Ministry. So the sermon that they preached, I said something about this. It was the text was about Jesus shaming the wise and lifting up the fools. And I said, I'm nervous about this making it to, what Churchwide sees, but like, if Bethlehem can put together an affordable housing project, shame on everyone who can't. And like, I don't yeah, lots of churches do lots of great things, but like, I mean, Blake knows my first year, we had $120,000 budget and a $60,000 deficit on that budget. Like, we're coming from a rough place and are taking real risks, because we think that's the only way to like get real results. We didn't start the project after we had funding. We're taking a risk that we're going to be able to figure it out. And so I think that's like, and I mean, obviously I'm biased, right? I have to tell you something like this, but I really like genuinely wouldn't have taken this on if I didn't believe that it's a project that needs to happen for the sake of our neighborhood, but also a project that should show what is possible for churches. We're one of 3 churches in our synod that has increased membership and worship attendance consecutively over the last 3 years. And I think that really speaks to the fact that we've put our community first. And I think like that's like, there's a lot of churches that are looking around saying, what are we going to do coming out of this pandemic? The church I grew up in is closing this Sunday. And that's like devastating to me. It was a beautiful, like, small church that I grew up in that produced me and a couple other pastors, because it was a great place to grow up. And I think the answer is put the community first, and the people will come. And I think that's compelling enough that I'm willing to spend all my time fundraising for it and taking pictures in the mud and doing all of that, because yeah, it's what the church should be doing. And I think if we can pull it off, that's both like shame, but also hopefully inspiration to make other places think, well, we could take a risk too. And, if we're going to die anyways, we might as well die trying to build something that's worthwhile instead of just hemorrhaging money to supply pastors for the next 34 years. Sorry if that's bleak. I don't.
No, those are good thoughts, Pastor Ben. Thanks.
So how much more do you have to raise now to reach your goal? You said by April?
Yeah, sort of. The bill is due at the end of May. So that's like, my our goal, because it's going to be a multi-year project, is to fundraise each year at a time and not take out a mortgage on any of them, so that Bethlehem isn't indebted to a developer or a bank, and can use them as a project to like improve our neighborhood and help keep us sustainable. We also can't afford to take out a mortgage. Let me pull up an email. I sent these numbers to someone earlier today. Yeah, here it
Pastor
is.
Blake, I thought you were getting good at property with just having the building to take care of, but imagine Pastor Ben's got a whole new level of.
Oh yes, no.
Lord, we'll see. Right now we have $43,000 in hand. We've raised, I think, $26,000 on GoFundMe the last time I checked. We have, I would say, about $40,000, maybe actually a little bit more, that have been seriously committed to us by churches that we don't have their checks in hand yet. So what is that? So it's it's a little bit over 100,000. I see someone with a calculator. Yeah, so that's where we are right now. So we're not there yet, but it's been a good start, I think, and an encouraging one. And it makes me feel like we are going to get there, which a couple weeks ago was a little harder to believe.
Very cool. So you said, so end of May was really deadline. So, I mean, because we're great procrastinators up here. So,
so for you, we'll say April.
There you go. All right. So, okay.
I'm gonna have to go in a minute, but you've given me a lot to think about, and
thank you,
and us too. So.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate that, and like I said, St. John's has been an encouragement to us for years, and honestly, just getting the chance, like, it's so much nicer. I really like talking to people, and to me, this is a project worth talking about. And so I really appreciate that you wanted to do that instead of just like, taking my email to a committee meeting and saying yay or nay without getting any more involved or invested in the actual process and what's happening.
No, we've been listening at a distance as Pastor Blake has been keeping us involved. And I mean, I've gone to your website a couple of times and I've been tempted to get the live stream, but I admit I have not yet seen you guys in action. But we'll get there one of these days.
If nothing else, it's worth going. Ben's a wonderful preacher, but they have a fantastic musician. I'd steal him away in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I go to church because of our musician. And that's like, it's like one of my most compelling reasons to tell people to come in person, right? Is like, it doesn't sound as like, it sounds great on Zoom or whatever, Facebook, but nothing compares to the experience.
It's definitely, we're very blessed. It's a very different style, but it's pretty fantastic. That's great gospel. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to be honest, so full disclosure, I think, Ben, you called or texted me back in like October, November?
Probably October.
Really going to be a reality. And I have to admit, I said, Ben, we're like 2 weeks away from stewardship campaign and Pledge Sunday. I think we can help. I don't think we can help just yet. So that for like, can we hold till the new year and then let's talk. But also wanted to try to bring, that's why we invited several different people for different committees here, because I do think that this relates to things that we're doing with our mission ministry in several different areas. This is absolutely part of our anti-racism work. I mean, I think this, there are so few African-American Lutheran churches, and we have a partnership with one of them. And I think it works with our social justice. It works with our real commitments here in New Jersey to affordable housing. But I think partnering with other parts of the country, in fact, even, we're learning things about how, we're not the same context, but how do we partner with, but also learn from the same experience. And then finally, I do think it's really important in whatever way we can support this, that part of what we committed to, 4 years ago, to be a partner congregation, is that we would be mutually bound to one another, right? We would pray for one another. We would celebrate with one another, had things celebrate. We would one another had to mourn. So, that's why when the hurricane happened, we wanted to get the word out. And in fact, people were very generous. So that's why I wanted more of you on here than just me showing this, though, because I thought that, if we're really going to take this partnership seriously, we need to, in fact, not just send a check, but actually know what's happening. And so that we can be actually engaged in this work.
Yeah. Good. I've got to go. Thank you all.
Thanks, Connie.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? We're about 75 minutes now, but.
I think I got what I got an awfully good feel for this. So
we can take this back to some of our various respective groups and think and pray a little bit about how we might creatively support this. So this is still me putting off the answer of, I don't know what you can put us down for, Ben.
That's okay.
As I told you then, though, I said, I don't think we'll be able to bring in the 50 or 100,000, but, let's see if we can do some amounts of money. But,
yeah. No, I really appreciate that. And, it's a process, and I enjoy and appreciate the more engagement that people are interested in. I wasn't expecting anything different than this meeting, which was really enjoyable, and which I really appreciate.
Well, thank you for your time, and thank you for the prayers, and please do let the saints know that we are praying for them too. Every week we pray for Bethlehem in New Orleans and St. Stephen's Grace in Newark every single Sunday. But people will say they didn't know what those were, but they knew that we were praying for them.
Exactly.
No. So, all right. Well, thank you, Ben, and thank you everybody for coming out on a Thursday evening.
Yeah. Thank you for making time.
Thank you
so much, Pastor Ben.
Bye.
Take care.
Have a good night.